Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, as of recent research, and of course looking back at satanic organizations and their influence, particularly in the past, even going up to today, as something that's shrouded in great mystery, and for a reason. Because these are criminal organizations doing all sorts of horrible things, particularly in the grabbing and abducting of people to put them into the people trade, the sex trades where they're used, particularly boys, etc. And it goes on and on of how they've used children, etc. And there's a very long list of things that are linked to satanic organizations. One of the problems is that getting to the heart of this and making arrests seem to be something that our law enforcement is very famous at doing. I mean, we have millions of street gang members, tens of millions. We have huge organized crime, mafias, and everything. Nobody is arrested. Nobody, the last major shootout that I remember happening of any content was the Symbionese Liberation Army that happened in Los Angeles in the 1970s. They were the people who kidnapped Patty Hearst. I remember watching it on the television show. So it was somewhere in Los Angeles where the big shootout was. And it was quite a shootout with the actual police there. So, but after that, what is it? I mean, from what I understand, thousands of gang members' bodies are found every year in Los Angeles, Bloods and Crips apparently, and I'm not sure how much else. But all of these gangs have been running wild for pretty much 40, 50 years. They want to talk about things happening today, but they never had control of anything, and now it's just a game done by law enforcement so that they don't get defunded. They should be defunded by 50%, if not more. They're good for putting traffic accidents, putting cones out. The problem is these never have been followed up, and there's a huge amount of money behind this crime, this street crime and organized crime, and the amount of people bought off is just staggering. And the amount of people working for the different levels of this organized crime is staggering as well. But I'm not going to go into that right now. Let's talk about the process church and what it is really appears to be up to compared to what you've been told. I could talk for hours on them. There's an awful lot of details, and I don't think anybody cares or will remember it. But the process church of the final judgment was established in England, the United Kingdom, in 1963 by a Marianne Maclean and a Robert D. Grimston, which is a name he took later. But these are the two that established that in 1963. So you can see how far back this goes. This goes back to the 50s kids who apparently are pretty spoiled brats and never really decided to be part of society because things were cheap and easy back then. They also started out, and it's amazing how many people are connected to and how popular the Scientology was in the 60s and 70s. Major researchers like Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff were members. Many psychics. Well, this seemed to have been the place that a lot of people went to, particularly those kind of white middle-class type people, if you want to use that terminology. Scientology has always presented a front of normalcy, looking like everyone else, giving you the allure, the carrot on a stick of that, you're going to gain great empowerment and you're going to save the world. Now, a lot of people that join Scientology have said they joined it to save the world. I don't know how true that is, but that's what everybody says. Well, we can do something here. We're so helpless. In 1962, they, of course, while they were apparently, they were working with Scientology first, particularly Marianne was heavily involved, but they both heavily involved. And of course, there was some conflict here of, that she left. The church says they threw them out. So it's the same old story. And of course, Scientology has their own little take on everything. They started a splinter group, which was called Compulsions Analysis, which incorporated new religious elements and developed it into the Process Church, which is quite strange, which was established in London in 1966. So you can see how this progression goes. And this was the time where it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A lot was happening here. Everybody was taking drugs. Everybody was on hallucinogens. I mean, this just happens to be a fact. So what they did is, once they had started their little group here, and what I'm kind of amazed with or confounded by is they apparently have a fair amount of money wherever they go. Well, where do they make that money from? Well, from certain things that I've done research on, and this is going to be an ongoing project if I find anything new, but I want to get into some important issues here, was the fact that they gave a lot of courses. They seem to be very business-oriented, very interesting. So they're able to raise a lot of money. They had little concerts. They printed magazines. Well, this all costs a lot of money. How did they do it? It also takes a lot of technical abilities. You have to be very organized to print magazines, set up concerts, and other things. But of course, it was easier to do that in the 1960s, and people tended to group together. They got together for meetings and so forth. This has ended since the 70s, or at least the early 80s, where people just don't get together. So from there, they went to different places around the world, including Mexico, looking around. I'm not sure what they were looking for or what they were doing. And why did they go to Mexico? Now we can read through all there, and there's huge amounts of documents that they produce that are available online inexpensively, and I'll review those in a future video as time goes on here. And I put up a lot of their different images and so forth that are online here to look at them. It's very interesting. They've been linked to everything. Now, these are two interesting characters. Marianne Maclean was born, apparently grew up in poor conditions. She's Scottish, from Glasgow. She was a child of a single mother. And they had linked her to getting into working as a call girl and getting involved in prostitution, ring scandal, and joining the Church of Scientology. She was linked to Sugar Ray Robinson, so it is alleged, and a lot of this is just coming from the internet and Sewerpedia, which has some pretty bad writing on these two people, not much at all. Very typical of Sewerpedia. She met Robert Moore, who would become Robert D. Grimston. They married in 1964 and became involved together. So they were running the church. In 1974, Maclean took over the church, pushing out Grimston, who, from what I could tell, a lot of people didn't like, was kind of strange, etc., on and on. So we're not sure what happened there, but it was his church, and he was pushed out, and why? So, this is, again, not very unusual. This happens with all sorts of relationships and organizations, etc., especially if there is a lot of money involved. And there seems to be an awful lot of money. They're moving around. They're able to set up different facilities. And of course, they have figured out how to go to the streets and teach people courses and other things where they charge for, apparently. But we're talking about, and even one of their ex-followers stated that they probably made about $2 million a year, which I think is quite a lot of money for a little church. But they were very good at grabbing people, very good at publicity, etc. So they had some great business skills. I'm not sure where this came from and who was doing this, but this certainly is part of the organization. So they tended to be everywhere. They were all over the United States. They had, I don't know if they had offices, as you could call them, in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, all the major places. They were there because that's where the people were. And of course, that's where the money is. So they've been everywhere, and they were very well known because they were in your face. They had magazines, as I mentioned. They put on little rock concerts. A lot of people knew of them. They were very active. They also weren't very active as normal people. So they were very active in very strange behavior in terms of the fact that their church was supposed to be this blending of Jesus, Jehovah, Satan, and Lucifer. And they would have this on their kind of logos. They also had the Process Church of Final Judgment. Everything was done very dramatically here. And they have a symbol which they claim are the 4 Ps, but it looks very much like a swastika. And we just trying to figure out how that fits in as well, because they are this pseudo-Christian group. Now, they state that the reason why they included Lucifer and Satan was the duality of the human spirit. And they wanted to find out, well, what are you working more from? Are you working more from the Jesus, Jehovah side of things, or are you the type that's more down in the gutter and involved in sex and drugs? Is that your personality? And, I think that there's a great credibility to this way of thinking if that was part of it. And we just don't know anything. And what they published, what they told the public is not really known if how true it is. Because people tell you all sorts of things, and it may not be true at all. I mean, there's people that hide behind all sorts of things that are Satanists, including radionics and Norse religions. These are out-and-out Satanists who we all know that come out and say, well, I just make radionic machines. It's just that I happen to be a horrible Satanist practicing all sorts of terrible things. And they have this on a website that even was connected to them. But it just shows you how big the world is to a degree. Do people stumble on this? And people don't really care. That's the other problem, particularly in modern times. But this is quite common. A lot of people say they're one thing, and then if you carefully read their books, particularly things like introductions, who they thank, well, they're thanking Satanists. Well, why are you thanking Satanists? You're a Satanist then. Why do you have black magic stuff and organizations and training people in those areas? Well, because you're a Satanist. And that's, of course, what people do today, and they're hiding behind all sorts of businesses. But what's really behind them is that they're working for these satanic international organizations that are criminal on top of it. They're all linked to criminals, because that's where the money comes from. The law enforcement uses and works with them, and it perpetuates this. And there's a very deep, dark underbelly of all this as well. So they have all these crazy symbols. They have their own symbols, which are really weird. And of course, they show Grimstone, of course. They had posters up of him, and it says Yahweh, Satan, Lucifer. They do use crosses as well as that swastika thing. But, they weren't trying to get mom and dad. They weren't trying to get that guy going to Christian college. They were trying to get the huddled masses of people, the people that were disenfranchised, the people on the street, etc. But their actual altars and so forth all looked very Christian with some odd symbols thrown in. So it is very interesting when you look at their symbology of what's in there. And usually you can tell a lot by an organization by their symbols. What does their symbols mean? As usual with a lot of these organizations, it's very confusing. And this is, of course, what is part of your misinformation, disinformation people do. They give you 2 different stories. So basically what's out there is 2 stories that you can confirm or deny the story that you like at that time. So all of this is part of what is the way you trick people. And this definitely is a cult. So I mean, this is people that really track you in. There was a lot of the children that were involved as time went on were all handled like very poorly, isolated from their parents. The usual kind of things you run into. They used a traditional Christian cross, and they have like a snake in the center of it, meaning this combination. But if you listen to them, this is just a combination of the lower and higher self, which of course does make sense to a large degree. So I mean, there is a certain part of that, and we can't look at the world as so many organizations and so many Christians do that. It's a great world, we just have to love each other, and there's no bad things going on at all, is there? Particularly by Christians. What exactly were they doing? So the whole idea is that we have to look at all these things. So when you have people that preach such nonsense, you have that problem. They started moving into robes and symbols. And of course, this is all part of the game you play to create an image. When people come in, they don't want to see you in a polo shirt and jeans or whatever the fashion of that time was, with jeans and a t-shirt. People want you to put on a show, and if you don't give them an image like that, they don't have it. And of course, you wanted the actual robes of a priest. This is all what they were actually trying to build as an image, and everybody falls for, the Hollywood of things. So the Hollywood of things are very important. So they've been linked to everybody. And why were they linked to everybody? Well, we have a few problems here, and that's what I want to get into here. So we don't know what they were up to. They've been claimed to be doing dark satanic stuff. They were tried to link them to the dog killings in Uttermeyer Park and Yonkers. Well, all of this is very dubious to think that they are the only group out there, but they were the most public. And, if I was a person trying to do a lot of illegal stuff, I would point to them. Oh, look at them. They got a shop downtown. Here's their literature. They're obvious Satanists. They have Satan and Lucifer on here. So this is a great way to move blame to somebody else easily. It's also very easy to check researchers and other people by doing this, because researchers know absolutely nothing about occultism. None of them know anything, and they want to research Satanism by reading books on witchcraft, which is absurd, because witchcraft is not in any way connected to Satanism. There isn't a Satan in witchcraft. That is part of the Judeo-Christian system. Now, some of this gets confused with demon worship and demon sacrifices and old grimoires, which were written from Christian point of view. The grimoire that has been talked about so much, the ritual magic grimoire, the Grand Grimoire, the Red Dragon, is basically a Christian book. You're calling on Christian entities and demons. There's Satan, Lucifer in there, and several other ones. Well, this all comes from the Judeo-Christians. And they also have Christ there, etc., to protect you and other things. So it's a mixed-up conglomeration. Of course, people have always hidden within Christianity, moving from other religions similar to Santeria and Voodoo, where they've renamed their gods the saints and so forth. We all know that Santeria, he talks about going to this saint, going... No, well, really, that goes back to different African gods. So it's very confusing how all these things work. But you're not going to find things out by going into witchcraft. And you have to understand the many variants of occultism, of whom I have a doctorate in occult sciences and have studied them all. And the elements of these have absolutely nothing to do with Satanism. Now, without getting into too much detail, of course, there's using of demons in negative and positive ways to manifest for you. And there's also, when these ancient grimoires talked about using sacrifices, using tiger skins, all these things which are very pagan in nature. And of course, you're blending all this. You got to remember that Christianity is now 2,000 years old, and it was only one Christianity. There was Christendom, and this ruled the entire world. There wasn't the 3,000 or 4,000 sects that we have right now. And these, like any popular religion or anybody wants to keep power, they basically went into horrible brutality to convert and to keep people in their, quote, church, as we know from the Inquisitions. But that's only part of it. So we have to understand where all this comes from, and people don't get this. So if you're involved in things, you're going to point to someone who's the most popular. And if you're really doing something underhanded, well, why would you possibly be so public like the Process Church was? Now, the Process Church did anything they could to be shocking. There has been talk, which has been pretty much unable to confirm in any way, that Charles Manson was a member of the Process Church. By the way, Charles Manson went to the highest level of Scientology that you could go to. Very interesting character and very connected in so many areas. People think of Manson as just this street thug, brutal person. Well, he went to all the people at that time that were offering anything, including the Process Church, and he was not a member. Matter of fact, being a member of the church was very difficult, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But they did go to him, and they printed an article that he wrote. I think he was in prison by then. And, of course, they printed articles by priests and other people. But it was part of what they wanted to get into. And, of course, this is what people were interested in. If you have a magazine and it says article by Charlie Manson, well, that's going to sell copy. I would read that. So this is part of their publicity and business thing. Their basic duality and their using of these affronting words and symbols was very smart marketing. Because here again, people didn't really care. They explained to them the dual nature. And just like today, oh, that sounds okay with me. You know, how many people are wearing satanic pentagrams, the upside down pentagrams? It's just artwork now. I've seen this on hundreds of people right on common places. I've mentioned this before, and watch for this. And we're just not talking about, heavy metal bands. We're talking about people in general. It's now become accepted to wear an inverted pentagram. It's fun, it's weird, it's strange. So, well, it's not something to joke about. But this caught a lot of people's attention, and they were everywhere, apparently, even around the world where they set up groups. Because, again, they had money, and we're not really sure, well, where did this money come from? Were they that good, or was something else going on? Did they go to Mexico to set up drug connections? Why did they go to these different places, and how were they doing this at the time, and where did their money come from? And we'll get into the final thing that ends up here, of where the so-called church ends up, which has basically been dissolved, which is very interesting. Now, they were heavily mentioned, apparently, and I don't think that Maury Terry, the author of The Ultimate Evil, who was just a researcher of the Son of Sand case, and it looks like, that was his only baby. I really can't find that he did anything else, and I have to wonder how he survived doing different things. He was editors here and there, but apparently this book was the only thing he's ever written. He wasn't able to complete a second edition of it before he died, but how did he survive? What did he do? I doubt he made enough money from the first edition, but he was able to, of course, sell television rights and everything else eventually, which makes things even worse to a degree, because how much of that was actually changed. Now, after they left Scientology, they tried to do a similar Scientology thing, and I'm assuming that Scientology came after them. They're known to do this. They weren't very successful. They said, well, what can we do? So they decided to get into the occultism rage of that time. People were into paganism. They were into the free sex, the free love, all that kind of stuff, the drugs. And, of course, Scientology wasn't connected. It was more of a mental thing as far as I understand. So it was all these different techniques. You paid them a lot of money. And I'm assuming they learned how to charge people for things in Scientology as well. It's the reason why they could raise so much money. This is a business aspect which L. Ron Hubbard perfected. Grading people, having them constantly buy new courses, charging people a lot, and all of the stuff that he put together. Quite an interesting system that is appealing because it does deal with not religion per se, but it deals with your higher self, consciousness. People like that. They don't necessarily like religion as much. So this was all part of what they figured out in their initial training. Then they started a church, which was for tax reasons and to be able to go out there and play this kind of costume game. And everybody likes cosplay, as they call it, costume play, where you dress up and wear these things. It's quite impressive. If you walk into a place and people are wearing robes with big logos on them, well, this is kind of, boof, what is this? And as we said, they were everywhere. Now, where all the money and everything else came from, we just don't know ultimately. Well, where did all this come from? So there's, you can't find good researchers, and they don't think in kind of a business manner. I like to follow two things. The old saying is follow the money. Well, where did the money come from? How did they make their money? And follow the fires, because all people that are doing stuff, there's fires hooked up because they're burning documents. And so I don't know how. We just happened to throw 4 gallons of gasoline in that room there and it caught on fire. Well, what was in there? All our records. So this happens all the time, from military bases to Building 7 that was blown up to get rid of the records in 9/11, which probably was the whole reason why 9/11 happened, was to get rid of all those documents that had a whole bunch of really wealthy people trapped. It's amazing. Excuse me. It's amazing how these things aren't better protected and why there aren't copies made. But there isn't copies made of anything, people. Remember that. When your computer goes down, you lose data. Apparently, so does everybody else. And a lot of things are just not put digitally right now. People would be surprised how much information. I mean, trillions of bits of information are lost every day because it's not properly backed up. And that's the one problem with digitalizing everything, is that one click of a switch and it's gone. So all of this is something we have to be very careful of and watch to the highest degree of what's going on. So we have this. They're everywhere. Everybody knows about it. They're very popular. They generate great interest to a degree. But like everything, they never really, I don't know how do they make their money? They all claim the same thing, just like the Temple of Set. You know, they have 300 to 500 people in their organization. So, and this doesn't vary that much. You get these kind of statistics from any group out there. How many people in there? 300 to 500 active members. Maybe if you're lucky and you're a card-carrying member of something that only costs $5 or $10, you may have several thousand people, because it's just, you know, you get the membership card and that's just kind of a fun thing. You didn't pay much for it. So when we look at all that, we have to understand that. So they're everywhere. So what does that mean? They're an easy scapegoat. Now, they've been tracked to everything, and it amazes me that they haven't been caught, any of them, for anything. People are coming out now. One of the people that was there from the beginning has been coming out and talking. You can find him, and I'll leave some links as well here as we go on, that's talking about the church. And of course, you know, when you listen to a lot of interviews and you're a trained researcher like myself, I find there are discrepancies in all of their discussions. This guy has been coming out and wrote a book. I'm sure he probably needs the money. Timothy Wiley. And is talking about the church, and I listened to one of his interviews and probably read his book eventually, but you can't study everything. I don't want to waste too much time in this area. So many other things to cover out there in the bigger world that empower yourself, but this is an interesting and important issue because these are the people that are running the world. And they are involved with all of these strange Nazis and other things. And there's fronts going on. There's appears to be no clean people out there at all. And I will talk about that as well as we come to the end here. But he has this, and he talks about it just being a church and how they live by all these different vows of poverty and celibacy and other things, which of course is not what they're known for. And what's interesting is this guy, Wiley, was talking about how difficult it was to become a full-fledged member. You had to give all your money. You had to spend time there. Well, this is done deliberately, particularly in the upper echelons. The same thing with the Temple of Set and other things, is that you don't want anybody coming in there to jeopardize your leadership position. And if they do, you want to make sure you get your pint of blood from them, meaning they give you everything and they're trapped in the organization so they have no place to go. Now, Scientology does this and everyone else. So he said how difficult that was, and there was about 30 people, priests or other things in there. I'm not sure what the male-female ratio was, but I'm not sure there was too many women operating there, even though obviously the founders of the church was this couple that were married. And of course that helps because that brings in women as well. But he talks about this stuff, and, you know, what caught my attention was the celibacy. Well, they're playing this game again, which is so typical of cults and everything else, that they want to control your sexuality just like your regular church does. Well, how different are they then? Is this normal to do this? Well, I don't think so. It's caused a lot of problems. Most churches that are successful are not churches that have celibacy involved in it. And the only ones that I know of as a general rule that is large is the Catholic Church. And there are different stages of that. There are deacons in the Catholic Church, and you can be married. So the whole idea is that there's all sorts of levels. But in general, Catholic priests are not allowed to marry or have sexuality. And we know what that has created. So are they mimicking this? And for what particular reason why they would do that? So they're acting like they're this kind of very radical conservative priesthood that's given up everything for what? Well, I don't get that either. I mean, after all, your nature's this and that. Well, if your nature's more satanic, then what you're actually doing is you're more into sex, drugs, and money. And of course, you're supposed to fight against that, I guess. And if you're the other way, what are you supposed to do? Take drugs? Screw around? So I don't understand the way these things are. And, to spend months researching this, reading their stuff to figure out their kind of goofball belief system, which seems to be set up to me to make a lot of money. And they traveled, or this was their business. And they learned their business in Scientology of how to make money and how to do it. And of course, they couldn't spin that off again. They probably weren't normal enough. The woman who started this had a dubious background of being a professional prostitute, apparently. Again, do we know that for true? But it's been stated otherwise, whatever that means. So what's on the internet, we have no idea how value it is or not. I've read so many different things. So we don't know. The husband apparently wasn't involved in much of anything. So this is how they made their money, and they were very popular out there in terms of they were everywhere. So, and this is how things were done back then. They didn't have an internet, they didn't have TV, they didn't have all the YouTubies and all the stuff that we have out there. So you physically went to places, and this is very effective, and it's still done to this day. Authors go out and push printed books. These printed books, they then set themselves up to be experts and then give people seminars on the weekends where they charge thousands of dollars. Now, this is how it's done. You don't make money from selling books. You make money from teaching and having seminars done. So they were everywhere, and they were blamed, of course. The one of the big problems is that they were hooked into Untitled Park, which had all these dogs that were beheaded there, particularly apparently German Shepherds. Now, one controversy listening to these people is written on the internet. They said they had Alsatians. Now, old Wiley here said they had German Shepherds. And so which is it? And it's an important area because in Untitled Park, they were founding these decapitated German Shepherds, which seemed to have been something there. And they're saying, well, that's because that's what the process church was into. Well, I don't know what that means. There probably was a lot of German Shepherds, and who knows why those particular. There could be an actual Nazi connection to that as well, since there's a Nazi connection to most everything. So they're trying to connect them there. Well, of course they were in New York City. That's where all the people were. Of course they were in Chicago. Of course they were in L.A. And they were in places where people like Charles Manson hung out and would talk to. And he was involved in all these alternative things. As I said, people think of him as a dummy, but the point is that he was quite an intelligent guy and was very interested in alternative belief systems. And by the way, Charles Manson, in terms of the famous case that everyone knows about, never killed anybody. He wasn't even there. Now, other people he may have killed and other things, and of course he likes to be scary as well. How much all that went on, we don't know. But he certainly apparently had a life of crime, but in between that he published music and tried to become a songwriter. All sorts of things happen there. And of course, if you run a newspaper or a magazine and you publish something like that, where what you're saying is that as much as it's really not true, but I did this when I published a newsletter. When the minute you publish somebody who has an opinion that is radical or weird, if you publish it, you're giving credence to them. It's not that you're giving them free speech. Oh, you believe what they believe. That's why you publish it. If you didn't do that, you wouldn't publish it. No, I was publishing stuff to give everybody's point of view. That doesn't make friends or help you in any way. The person that wrote that weird article is probably never going to have any value to you. They're just usurpers and liars and freaks. And the people that are in your organization that read that stuff then dislike it. So, publishing that was a good publicity stunt. Remember, there's no YouTube, there's no internet. This is on a newsstand, or you say, we have an article by Charles Manson. Yeah, let's read that. So, does that make them involved in any of that? No. Are they in the towns? Did they have a actual church or organization in Los Angeles that people went to and Charles Manson went to? Yes. And a lot of things happen at that particular address there on was it LCL or Cielo Drive? Days before that, basically drug case for non-payment happened, as brutal as it was. But all sorts of things happened there before that. So, and nobody knows. I don't want to go into all these details because they get very strange. But people don't want to understand what was going on, and particularly back then. I think things still go on just as much today. They're just covered up more. And it's a lot more deadly. I don't think that people who, they watch you, if you're part of these groups and you don't do what they say, you will have a problem. They'll get you in car accidents. They'll destroy your life. That's how it happens right today. And I've seen it happen, and I know how many hundreds of millions of people are involved with these criminal organizations led by criminal police. So, and they're all interwound together now, and things are much more organized than they were. So the problem is you get a guy like Maury Terry who knows nothing about occultism. He went to a Catholic high school and a Catholic college, and then he gets books on witchcraft to try and figure out what Satanists are doing. So it's completely in left field. He has no idea what he's doing, just like none of these people that get involved in this. They figure that everybody involved in, quote, occultism, particularly witchcraft, are doing evil things. They're doing sacrifices and murdering babies and all the things, and this happens even today. If you use the term occult anywhere, it's labeled as very negative, which shows you how bad people are. So if you can't really even use that, if you're going to use that, you might as well start using it in the black magic Satanist way, and then you can get more people interested. So to read those things because Satanists use a pentagram is absurd. They're using a reverse pentagram. They're mostly using upside down crosses. Now, whether the cross apparently was a symbol used throughout ancient times, again, stolen by the Christians and stolen by the pagans. Stolen by the Christians, I should say, who originally used the fish, by the way. The cross was a later development. But so crosses were used in so many areas as a symbol. So that doesn't tell you anything, but they use them upside down just like they're using the pentagram upside down, which is basically a good symbol, a symbol of Venus. It's been called many things. It certainly has no evil intentions to it unless you reverse the energy, and that's what Satanists do. They reverse everything. They talk backward. That's why backward masking on albums and so forth is so satanic, because that's what they do. They do everything backwards because they don't want to be part of regular society. So it appears to me that's what's happening here with the Process Church from all my investigations is the fact that they've been blamed for everything as an easy scapegoat. Oh, yeah, look at them over there. Look at them over there. And while you're pointing over there to the other place, you point to the right. At the left, all the criminals are doing everything else. And they're putting all of this onto these people, which don't really seem to have much connections to it. But let me get back to this churchy type of thing where they're acting like conservative. Now, I don't believe this Wiley guy. He doesn't come off to me as being really true. He's hiding a lot of stuff, and I'm not sure if any of it is horribly bad or not. It's hard to believe. They claim that they were big animal. They had lots of animals. He's claiming German Shepherds. It was thought about Alsatians, where they had 4 different dogs, which they take very good care of and fed very well, etc. So this was what they talked about back then, that they were great dog lovers. Well, that could very well be. So it's unlikely they would be cutting the heads off. You got to be a pretty radical person to cut the head off of a dog and murdering dogs. So it's unlikely that they did that if they had them as pets. But who knows? We have no idea. People are murdering and raping babies and been doing this for thousands of years, and particularly in the 19th and 20th century, where millions, even up to this day, of children are horribly murdered, brutalized, used in the sex trade, etc. So if you think that that is because somebody has a kid, that they're not necessarily doing horrible things, well, we can't really judge that anymore. It's like people who all of a sudden appear to be straight and then they're 45 and they come out as gay and they've had 2 or 3 children. Well, how could you do that? Well, you live your separate lives. So we don't know, and I don't particularly trust these people. On the other hand, their philosophy is interesting and they wanted to use shock value. But what the problem here is that they did talk about in this same little interview, and I'll have a link here, of how they had sex orgies, particularly with the founder of the church, because she was a prostitute. This was trying to break us out of our conservative English backgrounds where we had so many problems. So this is her way of doing it. So they had sex orgies, which apparently her husband didn't participate in, which is strange as well. Again, we get these conflicting things. She supposedly was a high-style prostitute involved with a lot of people, was hooked up to Sugar Ray Leonard, so she's quite a sexual person. I don't know about de Grimston, but Marianne certainly apparently was, and we just don't know about any of this. These sexy details are just that. Are they real or not? So she came from this background. It's certainly an easy way to make money. She wasn't necessarily all that attractive in my thinking, but she certainly was attractive enough. In that trade, you don't have to be necessarily gorgeous. You just have to be kind of out there. Anybody who's enthusiastic of what they do and who's willing to offer it, even for a price, is going to be taken up on that offer. So we don't know. So they had orgies, and these have been known before. Yet he's saying they had a vow of celibacy and poverty. And of course, Marianne and de Grimston both lived in luxury while they got no money. Very typical. You hear this everywhere. David Koresh was the same way. He was the only person allowed to have sex. He had air conditioning. He ate any foods he wanted while everybody else had to eat gruel. Couldn't have sex with their own wives. He took them, and that's the way it was. And people willingly did this, and his group, I don't know, had 30, 40 people in it that basically were couples, and Koresh was able to have sex all the time, and they had nothing. Well, this is pretty outrageous to think that anybody can fall into these things. And they're not necessarily weirdos and freaks either when you looked at those things. But all of this comes together here. So that doesn't make sense. Well, what was the part of that? They took vows of celibacy so they could have orgies later. Yeah, because celibacy didn't work, and they wanted to hold people, and you're not going to hold people unless there's some sort of sexual element. And of course, de Grimston didn't participate, so this guy claims. So he was too shy and, of course, didn't follow anything of the teachings of his church, and I guess he didn't care because he was getting it from Marianne anyway. Interesting. So this is what you do as a researcher. Listen. So in this interview, he talks about both of these areas. And of course, the interviewer, who apparently is somehow connected to the Process Church, I believe, doesn't go into those contradictions. Well, what do you mean? Where did they asked him about money, and they would say they were making about $2 million a year. That's a lot of money, particularly in the 70s. That's equivalent to probably 20 to 30 million today. You got it in the 70s. You could buy a car for $3,000-$5,000. Homes for $20,000 to $35,000. So you're talking about a huge amount of money. And of course, this allowed them to do so many different things, apparently. And they were apparently good at this. Again, that doesn't add up. Where did the money come? All the street hippies were given all their money. So where was the money coming from? Was there some sort of drug behind them that they traveled around a lot? They had these things. They went to Mexico. They went to the Caribbean. And then was this a way of establishing some sort of drug trade and getting to know people? We don't know. But certainly when you have such a weird philosophy as they do, using the kind of symbolisms that they do, that you are up for any kind of possible ridicule and problems. Now, Murray Terry stated that he tracked everything to them. Of course he did, because he was told to go to them. And he published it. And it's easy to take researchers, send in some people that are kind of credible and tell them to give stories. And then people like Terry then go ahead and repeat it as the gospel, as 100% fact, especially since they're not going to have any other information. So what are you going to put in your book? I don't know. Page 2. Page 3. I don't know. Page 4. I don't know. Page 5. I don't know. So the point is they're going to have to come up with some contrivance here. And you're not going to get it from them. These are people, and I'm not talking about the Process Church, but the people connected to the Son of Sam, these satanic cults, were murdering and torturing people. They're not going to come out and say, oh yeah, this was these people. You're not going to be able to find and track these people. Murder is not something that you can do and then 20 years later, yeah, I murdered somebody, but I'm not going to know. There is no statute of limitations on murder. So the whole idea is that you're not going to come out and do this. And nobody's going to come out and turn in other members. This is serious stuff. If they're cutting up dogs and raping and getting into child pornography and so many other things, they're not going to have any problems cutting your throat and get rid of you. And there's going to be a way of doing this easily so they can get rid of you. I mean, the mafia has been doing this for years. How do you get rid of bodies? Well, there's a whole complete way of doing this. And of course, all these Satanists, particularly when it comes to babies and so forth, well, you can get rid of the, quote, skin and carcass, to put it crudely, of babies pretty easy. There isn't much there. There's a lot of ways to dispose of something so small. So when you get into all these things, you have to be very careful. So were they involved in these practices? Did they do it? Well, there's no links to them whatsoever, and nobody was ever. But this is the problem with all Satanists. There are not hardly any convictions of Satanists for doing any types of crimes. Now, a lot of convictions or people arrested that are in these organized crime groups, these street gangs, are all Satanists, but they're just saying, well, we arrested this violent street gang guy. They're not saying that they were involved in all these other things, which they are. So, but they're not put that way. So, but there's plenty of other things tied to it. And the kind of things that are going on are shockingly commonplace in this world. How people are abducted, how many people disappear every year, are grabbed, deliberately grabbed, followed and grabbed. Pretty shocking. And this is a reality that goes on. So we need to understand. Now, how much of this kind of activity was this church involved in? Well, my initial conclusion at this particular time is it appears that they probably were not. They were good businessmen. Maybe they were selling drugs. Maybe they were doing some prostitution on the side. But I don't think they were involved in this horrific satanic practices that people were. Their aspect was, we have a light and dark side. But when you go ahead and you put that in your literature and you put their name out there, but that's also going to grab people. Is the local Baptist going to grab your piece of paper because it says Jesus on it? Well, if they did, they'll look at it and throw it away. But if there's Satan on there, people are going to take the time to read it and find out what it's about. So it's very good marketing. Now, what's ironic about all these things, since they've been linked to so many animal mutilations and sacrifices, which they really haven't. Untermeyer Park was ran by a whole bunch of different cults, and they were allowed to exist in Yonkers because of the fact they were heavily connected to rich people, and everybody was bought off. Isn't that the kind of same old story? Everybody's bought off, the judges, the police. Nobody goes into places where they know there are criminals hanging out, where it's dangerous, where people can grab and jump you and rape and kidnap you. Nobody does anything about these very public places. They're kind of difficult to police, but not really. You just got to spend some time there. Apparently, none of this goes on anymore. So where did they go? It's amazing how this changes. And it changes when there is a proper enforcement of these kind of things. So the Process Church has been labeled as the baddie because they were out there. They're pretty obvious. They got a symbol that looks like a swastika. Their name of Satan. And I mean, who does something as stupid as that and then is involved in all sorts of sacrifices and ritual sacrifices of animals and abducted? Who does that when they're that popular? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That is unfortunate, but true. I don't think they are way too public to do that. And I'm not sure that anybody would really care. There are contradictions in their stories. As I said, they're celibate. They don't want it, but they have millions of dollars, but they're not allowed to keep any. Certainly, Marianne and de Grimston made sure that they put millions of dollars in their pockets and were able to have a huge fund. Yet, as usual with all these cults, the other people had nothing. They talk about orgies, but all of a sudden they're supposed to be celibate. Well, which is it? So they talk about Alsatians and they talk about German Shepherds. Well, it's in this case, it's important. You know what's used to do? Well, it's not. Because the ritual sacrifices were German Shepherds. And for what is the meaning of that, unless they just had lots of them? Who knows? So as this goes on, the church finally broke up again. De Grimston was, whose father was a British Army officer, by the way, was pushed out of the organization by his wife. Now, we don't know why, but he was kind of a dead. From what I can understand, he didn't participate in the orgies. He wasn't doing much. He sounded to me like he fell into the real priesty, boring type and was not very liked by anybody. From what we can tell from Wiley, nobody really liked him that much. So, of course, they liked Marianne because she had the joys to give. But the whole idea is that we don't know what happened. But after that, of course, the organization slowly fades away, as most of those did in the 70s and 80s, as that whole trend burnt out. People didn't get together anymore. This started in the early 80s. People got isolated. All the things you hear about constantly. The only thing that revived all this stuff was the Charles Manson, because he had some connection in terms of the fact that that's where they were. And, of course, Maurice Teddy's book, The Ultimate Evil, which everybody has said that the behind the Son of Sam murders is a murderous satanic cult. And, of course, that is been told by David Berkowitz, who stated this. Now, we don't know how true that is either. Is that some fantasy? But it certainly appears to be the case. There's so much of this satanic practices going on in Untermeyer Park at that time and everything else. It's really irrefutable. And so many other things going on. So this is what people get into, and there seems to have been this. But, David Berkowitz has a long history of being a psychopath, if we can believe what we've been told about his early history. Of the fact of starting so many fires, being a bully, having multiple head injuries, seeing 3 or 4 people die. How many people have you seen die? Well, I don't know too many people have. I mean, you've had deaths in your family or friends, but we're talking about he has seen dead bodies on the street multiple times. He was in therapy. He was torturing animals, supposedly. All of this is so this guy, I don't know. And he's a very good psychopath, sociopathic person who is very believable. And that makes it more. Now he's turned the other cheek. He's a minister, all the things. They all do the same thing. So I believe every single serial killer has become a Christian. That's how they survive in prison. That's part of the rap, and they get good points for it and all of that. So we've got a problem here, which is Maury Terry. Maury Terry then came up with this, which he pieced together. Of course, he was led to that. He was told that, and this is where it all comes from. So, and of course, you feed it to people, and that's how disinformation works. So, from what I can tell right now, I don't think this church had any. Now, were they involved in illegal stuff? I believe they were, and I think they were probably selling drugs and having prostitution, things that, of course, generate lots of money. There's certainly, it looks like that, but their inner order of people, their priests, were supposed to act like they were some sort of monk, literally, with no sex, no money, doing whatever they did. So they got very radical, strange people, yet the leaders, of course, didn't, as I've mentioned several times. It's just so typical of these things. But here's where the kicker comes in, and it's really kind of very strange. So what happens after all of this? So they kick out one of the founders. She marries another guy. Apparently they had relationship problems, and she, being the female, was able to kick out the other ones by bringing in another man to fight for her and, of course, take over the church and all the other things that were involved in that. And apparently Marianne Maclean retained the alliance of the majority of the church members, reforming the group as the Church of the Millennium, taking it into an explicitly Christian direction. So once they went through all that stuff, once it got a little hot, she took the church away from now a husband who she wasn't getting along with, having problems, and apparently they pegged him as kind of an odd guy, which nobody liked, and they then formed this new church and then moved it away from all the shock value, because at this time it was no longer, people weren't interested. And you're talking about in the early 80s now, the Reagan times and everything else. So we're not going to get away with this too much in terms of people actually following these types of things, at least overtly. So she moved in this Christian direction. I'm not sure what happened. That organization, without going into the background of all these things, that pretty much folded. And she then, after that, and apparently, as I said, there's just gobs of money here. And that's what I'd like to know. Follow the money. Where did they get all this money from? And we'll get into this right now. So what happened after all of that? She recently died, and as I said, there's some talk that she may have been seriously injured, which caused her death ultimately from an attack by a dog that she was saving. Because what they did is they reorganized into the Best Friends Animal Society, because after all, they were accused of all this animal sacrifice, which apparently is untrue. I mean, a lot of people who are very brutal have very strong animal laws. The Nazis, while they were ripping babies' faces off and shrinking heads and operating on you without any anesthesia, and just in general raping and torturing everything they could get their hands on, had very strong animal protective laws. So we all know that Hitler was a great animal lover and was a vegetarian, by the way, as so was Mussolini. So the whole idea is that it's very interesting that this happened. But, none of these people were involved in any animal tortures that I'm aware of, in terms of these people who, here they are torturing, their own people in their own country. It's at least 12 million low level. While they were making sure the dogs were fed while the people were starving. This is so typical. So there was nothing at track that there was any of that going on in what we're talking about here in World War II in Nazi Germany. So it's that weird thing that goes on. So does that still hold true for the processed church? Because they wouldn't do this because they had this love of animals. Well, they formed... there seems to be the people involved in the Best Friends Animal Society, which was formed in 1993, which is 28 years old, was formed by who's running it now, of course, Dee Prayer, which was her new husband's name, and Batista. Seems to be these are the two people that are running it mostly now since she has passed. So it's her husband's family. I'm not sure who these, but I'm sure they're relatives there. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization for animals. It's located in Kanab. Is that how you pronounce it? Utah, out in the middle of nowhere. It's all very, very interesting. And what is very interesting about them is the huge amount of money they're bringing in. So to go from the processed church, this weird, strange thing, of course, maybe they always loved animals. They had animals. Who knows? Maybe this is where they figured they could do the best work. After all, they had ran that Satanism, Suto thing into the ground, the orgies and everything else. All this was gone, particularly because of the AIDS epidemic, which is still raging around the world. So all this free sex and everything else ran its course, as well as drugs and everything else, which was getting more and more difficult to carry out. So they figured that this is the way they were going to go, and apparently they had huge amounts of money again. Quite shocking of what they actually have here. So between the two, and of course she died in 2005, which is, so they're in southern Utah here, which is quite interesting, running this massive animal science. It's a no-kill. They've taken care of huge amounts of, huge numbers of animals. The sanctuary is 3,700 acres, which is an additional of 33,000 leased from the United States Bureau of Land Management near Zion National Park. The sanctuary is home to around 1,500 homeless animals. Now, they're in the middle of nowhere, so I don't know how they get animals. It's kind of strange. It's a no-kill sanctuary. They never kill any animals there. They let them live out their entire life, and they have a variety of animals: bunny house, dog town, cat world. And there's a no-kill. So if they can't adopt them out, they don't kill them, which is what happens with all your local dog pounds and so forth. All these things locally, they keep them for a period of time, and then they are killed. All of this is very fascinating, and they are, this is what they moved into. I don't know how many people remember the Michael Vick's fighting dogs. Well, they were the ones that came in and picked them up. They have adoption centers apparently around the country. Let me change what I said there to a bit. Los Angeles Adoption Center. So they have adoption places around the world. They're in with everybody. NASCAR driver Alex Bowman added a Best Friends Animal Society paint scheme to his car to raise support for the rescue. Bowman pledged to make a total of $30,000 in donations as well. So you're talking about, this is a well-known organization. This is not and they're connected to everybody. And why are they connected? How did that happen? Where did they get all that money from again? There's always this big area that you don't really know about. And there's some interesting things that have happened, including them taking over the North Valley shelter in Mission Hills, California, the Los Angeles area. They could no longer run their animal shelter. They put out, they were the only people, the only bidder for the contract to run the shelter was them. And apparently that shelter cost $19 million to build just 3 years prior. And other organizations complained because they never heard of this contract happening. So it's kind of like they were pushed the contract. Why? But, life is very confusing. They were involved in Katrina in 2005 and sent a lot of employees and money to New Orleans to take care, the animals there. The Michael Vick's fighting dog problem. They've worked with PetSmart. And they have programs run all around the country. And they are one of the premier animal sanctuaries out there. Now, do we know anything about them? They're obviously running a lot of organizations in a lot of cities and other places. Is this a giant animal source for sacrifices around the country to other people that actually use dogs and cats in satanic rituals? After all, nobody wants these animals. If you ship 3 dogs to somebody in, pick a state, Idaho, nobody's going to hear from them again. Nobody knows what's going on. If those animals are used anyway, nobody knows anything. There has to be records of this, but we just don't know. So there's no research or any talk that the Best Friends Animal Society has any way been involved in anything. But that doesn't mean anything. You don't hear about a whole bunch of things. You don't hear about all the corruption in the U.S. military, the police departments, etc., where all sorts of hideous things are going on. So we just don't know if anything here is going on. It doesn't seem to be investigations. They are a 501c, which means their books and everything else are open to the public. I don't know how many people understand that, but if you're a nonprofit, it means you are operating at the guise of the federal and state governments that we're allowing you to do this, and that means your books are open to us. So at any time, they can come in and demand to see your books and what you're up to. So... but what's shocking is how much money they have. They have revenues of $87 million. They have 838 employees. And again, we get into a lot of different information here, which tends to be contradictory. The founders are not the same people. Michael Mountain, Gregory Castlepot, Ernest Eckhoff were the people that were said that were there. So a lot of this is very interesting. Of course, since they are a 501c, they even post their tax returns online, which is really interesting. And, of course, they take donations. They get a lot of donations, apparently, from the public. People are out there that want to help, like the race car driver I've just mentioned. Apparently, you can actually go there as well. So anybody that thinks something, of course, when you go there and you look around, well, they know that people are looking around. What's really going on, do we know? Well, of course not. We'd have to talk to ex-employees, disgruntled employees, which may have an axe to grind, or these are the only people you can really trust to give you kind of a true story. Their motto is save them all, since it's a no-kill facility. It's huge. Why they need to lease all this property from the federal government, kind of insulating themselves, doesn't make sense. But they do say come and visit. Go there. So they want people to go there. They want volunteers. You have to wonder if nothing has actually come out about them, except this links to the Process Church, which never really been confirmed that they did anything wrong. Absolutely nothing has been confirmed. None of their top people have ever been arrested that I know of, and none of this stuff. So picking them out like Maurice Terry did, I think it just shows his kind of ignorance without much of everybody's pointing to that while behind him everything else is going on. And whatever he left of his second book that was supposed to name names, apparently nothing has happened to it. He gave it to somebody who made TV show from it, a pretty bad one from Understand. I'm trying to find this I think it's on Netflix, which I'd like to see. But all of it seems to be pretty bad. And they list all their tax returns. I mean, they're taking in hundreds of millions of dollars. They are a huge organization. There's nobody like them. And I don't, they have places in all the major cities. I'm not sure how they get dogs, where they come from, what they're doing, dogs, cats, and other things. All of this. But let me give you some information I've just ran into recently here on another. The World Wildlife Federation, who fought for that from the World Wrestling Federation. Well, they've been linked now to all sorts of problems. They go in, and it was started by a Nazi, by the way, who took this organization. They go into places under the ruse of stopping poaching. They grab large pieces of land. They murder a lot of the natives there, set up a little anti-poaching group, and they've been involved in all sorts of criminal, apparently, what has been alleged activities, getting involved in fights, large fights, to support big corporations. So the dirtiness of the World Wildlife Federation has been alleged to a very high degree. And they get a lot of anti-poaching people. They're getting a lot of mercenary types there who are very brutal, doing a lot of bad things to the local population. They go in there, set up a tiny sanctuary, but take a whole bunch of other land, and then corporations come in and mine it and use it, etc. So these are the alleged allegations against them. And I've never heard of this. I thought they were squeaky clean. Nobody is squeaky clean. Just like this organization goes back to a radical, strange, bizarre cult. And there's no other way of looking at it. Now, they have not been traced to anything highly negative, unlike the World Wildlife Fund, which people are alleging are starting their own little wars, moving mercenaries in, butchering a lot of people, and taking over land under the guise that, we're taking over 1,000 acres and 100 acres we're using for elephant protection, but the 900 acres are going over here to get resources. What a sneaky way. The other interesting fact is that all the ecological organizations that we are familiar with, almost all of them were started by very wealthy people to control land. So if it's government land, it is preserved for the corporations in the future. Because what happens is that if you have a national park or something, you can allow people to go in there and get lumber and other things. And they probably pay a ridiculously small price for it, but you have put that land aside, which means that your wealthy organization doesn't have to pay taxes, doesn't have to support it. You go in and use it when you want to. These are all, everything just gets worse and worse in life, and this is unfortunately the reality that we are looking at, that we need to look deeper at. So I've never heard of anything coming from this organization. Could there be some nefarious, horrible things? They have regional programs in New York, Los Angeles, Houston, Atlanta, Utah, Northwest Arkansas. You think with the kind of money they have, they'd have a little more bigger cities. I don't see Chicago and so many other places. They don't seem to have places which are kind of big cities. But I mean, if you look at all this stuff, this is one of the nicest organizations you can have. They have millions and millions of dollars that they have access to. Their operations all over the place. And how did this all happen? So it's very mysterious, and of course you go there and they talk about their history being founded from people from all around. The actual name of Marianne is no longer able to be found there. Her husband, DePrayer, is listed there with, I'm assuming, other family members. Or maybe that was her, but they're not talking about, or is there a mention on their website of the Process Church? And of course, there's a whole bunch of people now involved in this organization, 838 employees. You're talking about a huge operation that is in the hundreds of millions now. What I saw, figures on trying to find that again, is that they had revenues of almost $809 million. You're talking about getting up to the billions. I've noticed in 2016 they're saying $89 million, and they break down where their expenses go and what percentage of, and they're showing that very small amount of the percentage, even though large in numbers, are actually going to administrative. So they're putting their money, but where? What is going on there with that kind of income? They should have, appears to me, a lot more, but I don't know anything about it. They have their other regional things. They're running different places around the United States, as in Mission Hills, California, taking over a large place there, serving Los Angeles, which would cost tens of millions of dollars for all the work that goes there. Yet I've never really heard of these people. There's all sorts of animal rescues, particularly by breeds. People love a certain breed and they save them. They're all over places where people dedicate their lives to and taking care of them. Yet I haven't heard them involved in these areas or what. So what's going on with all this? They have a very large amount of people involved. They have lots of money. Where it's going, they have this huge amount of land there, which seems to be leased from the government. I'm not sure if they're getting a deal on that or what, but what do they need all that land for anyway, to be honest with you? Seems to me it's just an expense for no reason, but they are a nonprofit. Maybe they're getting it very cheaply. We just don't know what goes on with all of that. So it's very, very suspicious. And of course, there's absolutely no mention of the Process Church there, and probably rightfully so. I mean, why put that there? It's going to freak people out if they run into it. That was their past. The two founders, the Marianne has passed away in 2005. De Grimston is out doing his own thing, whatever he is. He's still alive, apparently, but he's not involved in the operation or doing anything else that we know of. Her husband, Marianne's new husband, after kicking out her first husband, is running the place, and we must assume, I don't know how much he was involved in the Process Church or not. It doesn't seem like there was that much going on with him. And apparently they converted over to this as their new mission, which if it's a good operation, we have to praise them for doing so much great work here and assisting in this area. It seems very suspicious to me, even though you can go there, but you're not going to really see what goes on in the background or even know what goes on in the background. And maybe the employees don't know. That's all part of it, of what's really happening here. We just don't know. Certainly there's great work being done here, but it's interesting that people who are linked to animal sacrifices, and not very closely from what I can tell, everybody was pointing the finger at them, and maybe they had some rogue people within the Process Church that were involved in some of this animal sacrifice stuff. But I find it hard to believe that they were involved in these other things. And I think it's a smokescreen to move people away from the real culprits. And this is the problem with people like Maurice Thierry and similar people that go out there and study these satanic cults when they're studying what? Where are these? We have books written by people who've been traumatized by them, that have been molested and kidnapped, a lot of stuff that people claim isn't real and may have been done for money or because these people are emotionally in bad shape, they're mentally ill. They point to all that, but this is all over, and there's all sorts of things going on, and there are massive satanic cults, and I am familiar with them that are operating. We have them out there. We have E.A. Connetting, who's on YouTube every place, and has been linked because of his teachings to crazy people, of course, that went out and murdered people. And there's lots of these cases going on. And as I've mentioned, they don't talk about people who are murdering and everything else, who are basically Satanists as well. So all of this is part of the reality that we have to look at. Is this group involved in it any longer? Well, it seems like this organization certainly is not, and unless there's something behind the headlines here that is hidden and frightening, which could very well be. I just found out about the World Wildlife Fund, who apparently is a pretty dirty organization, so it's alleged. I don't know without going into huge amounts of research, which I don't have time to do. But here we go again. I think that this whole issue and blaming the Process Church, which is basically defunct, and of course other people have tried to start things up, but these are just, newcomers who are trying to pick up on something that they kind of liked. And, they have all the literature, the stuff, so it's not a lot of work. You can throw it out there and try and get something going. We just don't know. Satanism has now become part of society. It's not looked at in any way as negative. It's looked at as a freedom religion, and we have the right to practice any religious belief we want to. The American military has come out and said, well, just because Michael Aquino's weird and have started a church, that has nothing to do with his leadership capacities or the fact that he should get one of the highest military clearances available and work at NORAD. They don't care. Pretty frightening when you think about it. So that breeds this. So you get people that have been stamped and cleansed, and it's okay, we don't care, just don't bring any of that into the office. Oh, sure, we won't. Yeah, but they have lots of people working with them, so we don't know what's going behind the scene. Then they use as happened in the Vietnam and probably even today, where bodies came home with tons of drugs stuck in the cavities of these bodies or in the coffins, which we're then smuggling. You get all these things because it's allowed to happen. So this case is far from closed, but I think that the trying to follow that same path, trying to connect people to the, quote, process church is pretty much a dry hole that we should move on to. Are there dangerous satanic groups that are everywhere working with things that are hooked up to huge, you're talking about memberships of tens of millions of street gangs and others? Well, yes, there is, and they're organized and it makes sense. It's just a way of tying people together yet again. And the fact is how clean, how well run is this organization? What are they doing is unknown. I mean, their finances are public, but that's part of the requirement of being a nonprofit. Is there anything else happening? They seem to be the go-to people. And of course, what would you know if you're in government and this is the largest animal sanctuary in the United States, maybe in terms of this type in the world? You as a politician, a person, would contact them unknowingly of what's going on behind the scenes of what's actually happening. Is there anything going on? Has this been a total changeover? We just don't know. We always have to be careful because the appearance of things is never what. Things are not as they appear. If you were to go to NORAD and talk to Michael Aquino, who wears hair like some sort of a goofball cosplayer looking like Eddie Munster, you may be taken back by it, but this guy is running, or has been, he's died recently, the Church of Set or Satan, was involved in Satanism for all these years, and now is rubber stamped, it's okay. He originated the backward flag on the uniforms. All these things are being slowly infiltrated into our realities. And what do we do about this? So, well, just some food for thought here as to kind of come up with this process church is one of the final links that always seems to be blamed for everything. But in their long existence, and now that it's been 20, 30 years for the Son of Sam cases and other things, and the process church hasn't been active for over 30 years now. It's been this animal sanctuary since, 1993 or somewhere in that area? Well, I mean, these are all dry holes. You're going to waste your time doing that. Should they be watched? Should you put your ear to the ground? Should we try and find sources of people that want to come forward and talk about this? Well, yes. But to think that this is the major thing and to tying everybody together here, it's kind of a neat way to make another book, make some money that you need to survive on, and keep basically kicking the old dead horse, which is going nowhere. So, of course, there are very active satanic organizations out there, and they are functioning at even more dangerous levels because of the type of corruption we have. But to think that the process church is somehow linked in modern times here, I think is kind of absurd. I think we're looking in the wrong direction. And, of course, people like Maurice Terry and his books are not really very credible. I mean, this is a guy who knows nothing about occultism. I see this even today with researchers. They know nothing about occultism, and they're hooked up with people that seem to have a preschool level understanding of what occultism is, how it works, and Satanism in general. You know, they're living off of bad movies, bad books, and a misunderstanding of how things work, and they don't know how to interpret symbols. They don't know how to do anything else. They immediately go to their initial training from their pretty much Catholic backgrounds that anything to do with the occult is evil. You know, the Mormons think this way as well. So this is something that has been pushed into their brains to keep them away from probably better cults than they are, and put us in a very bad position because they have no idea what they're talking about. These are people that are ignorant on every level from what's really going on. And, of course, that's what these groups want. They want you to misunderstand it. They want you to go after and investigate ridiculous things like Wicca and other things, which may have their own little kinks to them. But so do all the other religions that have horrible practices of eating flesh and drinking blood. Yeah, that's your Catholics. And of course your Baptists drink blood and everybody else. So the point is, you've got your Jews who are sacrificing animals as part of their conservative belief systems. Everybody's got this stuff involved in it that gets into these particular religions. So what are we supposed to believe with all of that? But so they fall back on this. They get a lot of bad books written by a bunch of born-again Christians who think everything that isn't stamped with Jesus on the front of it is evil and satanic in general. So the whole idea is that we're getting nowhere with that. You need to find educated people that know what they're talking about and who've been involved in that. And there doesn't really seem to be any interest in that. And a lot of people are very much intimidated by experts. They don't want to lose control of it. I've noticed this with so-called investigators of modern times and, of course, news reporters, because they don't want to interview anybody that they don't really know the subject matter from. So they're very intimidated because you're in control of the interview, and they hate that. So this is all part of the bigger problem that we all have to deal with and understand what's going on. But the actual disinformation that is out there is just frightening. And the people interpreting these things have no idea what they're interpreting. The minute you get off of that regular criminal activity, and once you start getting into what is considered, quote, alternative belief systems, alternative strange murderous societies, they know nothing about it, and you're not going to get any help from anybody because most people are either blackmailed, bought off, or working with them for one reason or another. So we got to keep that in mind. And at this particular point, since everything you run into is some sort of CIA operative linked to something everywhere, that everybody is dirty in one way or another. Now, the question is this organization just another one of those? It's certainly got a weird background. But, going from almost childhood or young adulthood, bizarre thinking, which a lot of people have done, into animal rescue sanctuaries, to think that you're bringing with you this murderous, satanic way of operating is probably doubtful. And you think that something would have happened, but there are very wealthy people involved here, and they've covered up the Son of Sam. They've covered up other things. They certainly could cover up practices or some operation within this sanctuary. Could be using these animals in horrible ways. We just don't know. But they are a no-kill organization. But when you ship dogs off to somewhere, cats, whatever they may be, what happens to them? Does anybody know? So we need to look at all these things, because it appears that there are no good guys any longer. Until next time.